Alors, merci beaucoup. Et puis, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous. I'm delighted to be here. Probably one of the few, if not the only non-AI person here in the room. So it's been quite a learning experience this entire day. Before starting, I want to congratulate the winners of the poster presentations. I think it's very important that we keep all this creativity going on in Canada. I want to thank also the people who asked the last questions about transparency, about predictability, etc., because that was a great actually mise en scène for our own panel here. And last, but not least, I want to congratulate everyone in this room and who's not in this room but is part of this gathering, and thank you actually for the science excellence, dedication, and incredible creativity that has ensured that Canada remains at the leading edge of artificial intelligence. So there have been a lot of conversations since yesterday that I heard about AI applications, transparency, impact on society, and so on. And before asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves, we have a superb, actually, interdisciplinary panel here. I'd just like to reflect for a minute or so on the impact, the societal impact, and the societal license of new technologies. So, as we heard from the questions, and as you know, and as I've heard over and over from going to schools where I'm encouraging boys and girls to go into STEM disciplines, people ask questions about AI, about robotics, whether the world is going to be taken over by non-human. And I think that we should all pay attention to these questions, and I'll tell you why. Because many years ago, I was part of another sort of disruptive technology and revolution in the life sciences, which is known as genetic engineering, that ushered a number of very important and interesting things, from biotechnology in the agriculture sector to the sequencing of the human genome, and with it, a lot of ethical conversations, but with it also, in certain countries, the social license for applications and innovations were actually not granted. And as a result, the society could not benefit from all the great investments and all the great advances that had happened in terms of the science and the technology. So if history, should tell us any lesson, I think it's that as you are creating these incredible advances that are revolutionizing our world, I think that we need to have a social dialogue and bring along people. And people are worried about a number of things, and we're going to try to address them. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask the panelists to please introduce themselves, say a few things about your respective areas and any thoughts, but don't take a lot of time, okay, so that we can have a conversation and hopefully with the audience as well.
Okay. So my name is Shai Ben David. I grew up in Israel. I did my PhD in pure mathematics, in set theory, axiomatic set theory. And then I moved to computer science and was for 17 years a professor at the Technion in Israel. Then I moved to Cornell, and 15 years ago I came to Canada, to Waterloo. And I'm focusing on machine learning, mainly theory, a lot work recently about clustering. And in the past year, I've been turning my attention to fairness and explainability, interpretability of machine learning, which I think is a very important aspect that should deserve more attention.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm Marc-Antoine Dilhac. I'm professor of philosophy at the University of Montreal. So I feel deeply the imposter syndrome right now. I hold a PhD from Paris 1, Sorbonne. I studied philosophy, ethical and political philosophy. I'm affiliated with Mila, where I lead a laboratory, Algora, and it's an interdisciplinary laboratory. I think interdisciplinarity is very, very important when it comes to the societal impacts of AI, how to frame the issues of the societal impact of AI. I'm also co-director responsible for deliberation at the Observatory on the Societal Impact of AI, and finally I sit on the Advisory Council of Canada with Mona and Elisa and other people in the room. My research focuses on the normative ethics of AI. So I said I've initiated the Montreal Declaration for Responsible Development of AI, which is basically a crowdsourced framework for the development of AI. And so my research focuses on both deliberative ethics of new technologies and of AI, but also on topics like explainability, interpretability, fairness. Well, we'll discuss this together.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Fernando Diaz. I'm a Mila affiliate, but based at Microsoft Research in Montreal. So my background is in information retrieval or applied machine learning. But in the last, I'd say, 5 to 6 years, in working with some of the largest machine learning systems in the world, you begin to recognize some of the things that happen at the interface of society and the AI that we're deploying. So these include things like algorithmic bias, they include things like propaganda and other ways that the system can fall short of the social expectations that we have. And so to that end, we've started the FATE team in Montreal, Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics, that really tries to address the societal impacts of artificial intelligence and study it from a multidisciplinary perspective, including not just folks from machine learning theory, computational social science, but also people from the social sciences, because we feel like that gives us a really holistic perspective on the problem.
Okay, well, thank you. This is going to be a very interesting, I think, conversation. So transparency, fairness, explicability. So what are the great advances, or what are the things that we need to focus on, both from a scholarly, scientific activity and then maybe in terms of engagement with the public?
Yeah, so I think that the first problem is there's a big gap here between there's a lot of awareness to the importance of interpretability, of explainability, of fairness. You have the European Union that passes regulations that requires it for many applications that affects humans, but there's a big gap between this and how much we really understand those things, and how much we can formalize it and evaluate how, I mean, I heard a lot here during the previous panels, people talking about that they would like machine learning to be more understand machine learning, understand how the algorithms work, like you were asking just a minute ago. And I'm asking, what do we mean by understand? What is the meaning of that? How do we understand to understand? And I think the big gap here is between how much these topics are important and affecting the applications, as we all know. Doctors will not employ anything that we develop if they don't understand how it works. But what do we mean by understand how it works? So the huge gap between how important it is and how little we have come towards developing a reasonable, solid theory to support these issues.
You know, I listened to you, and before I asked the others to weigh in, you mentioned the doctors. Actually, probably you guys prefer not to know, but for most diseases, we still don't know how to cure them. And when you get a drug, in most cases, it's still trial and error. The doctor cannot understand the mechanism by which it's working. I guess if everybody knew that, they'd be scared and would not take any drugs. So how do you manage, how to explain to society the unexplainable and sort of, reassure them or bringing them along? Marc-Antoine, you must think about these things.
Yeah, well, so first of all, I totally agree about we still need to understand what it means to understand. We have to understand what is a human explanation, a human relevant explanation, and it's different from the explanation of the algorithm itself or how it works in the inside of it. But we need to understand that an algorithm is embedded in a system, and the system is embedded in a social and technical social network where the system provides decisions, and we have to understand the decisions in the light of the other systems in the network. So if we want to explain how it works, we need to understand how it is embedded in the network of system able to make decisions, not only artificial systems, but also the people and institutions, etc. So we need to get rid of the idea that we can understand an artificial intelligence system isolated from the other systems. And then we can build a new understanding of how it works, because it works only when it is allowed to give some recommendations or to provide us with decisions, etc. This is where we have to interact with AI systems, and then the explanation will come from the interaction, not only explain the isolated system. And this is very, very important, because even for people, we're not isolated. We're not isolated systems. When you ask me for an explanation of any decision I make, I will relate to other people and decisions made before.
So, Fernando, if I try to make it simple, okay, this is a non-AI scientist, so you see how difficult it is, I guess, for your non-scientist out there in the public. So let's say that there are then two components. One is the individual developing the algorithm, because the algorithm, I guess, has interacted with the person, and then there is also the data on which, the machine learning and the interactive thing is going to happen, which has been also built by human. So how do you go about, ensuring or protecting against biases or having the diversity needed and reassuring people that this type of context has been taken into account?
Yeah, I think there's a few answers to that. For one, I think we need to step back and think about the what it means to ensure fairness, because I think the first question we need to ask is, what does it mean for something to be fair at all? And I think in the research community right now, that's even contested. Certainly within the computer science definitions of fairness, there's several different definitions. But then if we start to incorporate definitions from outside of computer science, which are perhaps more well-grounded, there's not one right answer. So it's going to be very contextual. So let's assume that we have some agreed-upon definition of fairness. Even then, it's unclear whether or not the biases are solely coming from the data set. They can be coming from the way the algorithm is actually designed and what it's paying attention to. Moreover, increasingly we have algorithms which are not just fed a static data set, they're actually collecting the data on their own. So this is reinforcement learning, where I think of it less as a data set then, a set of experiences that the agent is actually gathering, and then the agent can gather things in a biased way. Now, where is that bias being introduced? Well, it's being introduced because of the way the algorithm's being designed. And so how do we actually think about designing a system to collect data so that it is not susceptible to bias? But that's a few steps down. I think we need to start at defining fairness from the start.
Would you like to weigh in on the fairness part?
Yes, I think the fairness, as you were saying, I mean, we don't have a single definition, and we can see that different definitions, that each of them makes sense on its own. When you compare them, they are contradictory in certain areas. And my kind of assumption, it's not that I can prove it, is that we will need different notions of fairness for different applications, for different purposes. We cannot find one definition that fits for all. So the fairness for accepting students to university may be different than the fairness for policies of a hospital of who should get a kidney before whom, or different from the fairness of the judicial system that decide on bail. So I think one of the things that is not recognized well enough yet is that fairness is not a unique, well-defined issue, but it could be really context-dependent, and it also depends on the moral and fundamental principles of the person who applied the resource that we want to provide. I mean, what is more important to me? To have more minorities in my program, or to get everybody the fair chance, in the sense of if you got higher marks in school, you should go there first. And I think, I mean, last thing I want to kind of mention in this context is that I think it is very important for us to be more open and more communicating with people outside the area of computer science. So I think like the talk of Candice earlier, or talks that, I mean, I was in Simon's Institute in a program on fairness and interpretability, and my conclusion is that the most insightful talks were from people who came from outside computer science and mathematics, from people who are sociologists, for people who are working with law, from people who are philosophers, and I think we need more interaction with those outsiders.
So I'm just wondering, I agree with you, by the way, because I think that, AI is going to be an enabling technology, and I look forward actually to the next panel as well on health, to see how we're going to do this. But in the meanwhile, what do you feel, like, is Canada's leading in this area? Are there, other jurisdictions that we can learn something from, even if we're leading? What needs to happen for, all of what you've been, alluding to sort of happen even more?
That's a tough one.
That's why you're here.
No, but I think you're mixing two questions, which it's not clear to me where your focus is. Is it about Canada, or is it about what the science needs to do?
What does the science need to do, and what does the science of also interacting with society, needs to do? So, both in a way, and can we learn from anyone?
Okay. Yeah. But maybe before, I just wanted to add that, philosophers grapple with the idea of fairness for more than 2,000 years. And the only consensual definition is that fairness is about treating similar cases equally.
Yeah, but
But
then
what does it mean? Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. What is similar and what is equally? What does it mean? Equally. Well, the end of the story, because we cannot go much further. But actually, we can maybe go a bit further. if you bring together just a small number of experts, and you ask them to define fairness and to define biases and to find a solution to this question, it's most likely that you will miss important aspects of the questions and of the discussions, because a small number of experts will focus only on certain aspects of the question. And they will be very, very good at solving definite problems. But a lot of other problems will remain under the radar. So, what we can do is open the discussion. And when I say open the discussion, it's about bringing people, lay people, as I am for machine learning, for instance, into the conversation. And not because they're experts in the scientific sense of expertise, of being an expert, but because they know how the system will be deployed in their day-to-day life. And then they can highlight, problems that weren't seen at all. For instance, you want to develop an AI system that allows autists people to detect emotions. And then you do all the work on the scientific parts. You provide the best device, and you're happy because autists people now can detect and interpret the emotion on the face of the people they are interacting with. Now, if you put citizens, lay people, in the loop before designing this device, maybe you'll hear something like, "Oh well, it's very interesting, but maybe I don't want to be interpreted by your device." And maybe we should, change the settings of this device. And this is the kind of thing that we cannot get from just expert panels. So one avenue to explore is to open the discussion, deliberation with lay people, but we have to be very careful because we need. We need to focus the discussion on certain points. So.
Fernando.
Let me just chime in there. I think that's a great point. I've been thinking along the same lines, and to be honest, prompted by Georgina Bourne, if you're out there, hi, to think about things like techniques from design, for example, participatory design that involves more of the end user in the process. And this sounds good, all right? Now, the problem now connects to previously what we've been talking about with explainability, because I cannot bring in an end user and sit them down in front of a machine learning system and ask them, are you comfortable with this? Because it's not super interpretable right now. And so if we think about going back to explainability, interpretability, this is one task that you could imagine such a system being used for, on top of another task being, auditing the system or helping debug the system, et cetera, is for helping with that design process. Yeah.
So I'm going to open it for questions from the audience, and while you make your way to the microphone, I'm just going to ask this question to the panelists. It seems to me that fairness, transparency, and explainability is an important area of machine learning. So hopefully some of the students that we have, some of the students that you have, will help us out. But what would be some word of wisdoms or encouragement that you would give the students?
I think that the words of wisdom that direction that definitely is that don't get into the publication chase, to the race of publishing. I mean, we are seeing, I think, one of the diseases of this area, in particular in recent year or two of fairness, is that there are huge number of publications without much contribution, just because everybody wants to jump on the wagon, everybody wants to have a paper at NIPS, everybody wants to have his CV with more items in it. I think even in a previous panel, I heard someone saying, you know, his advice was publish only when you have something to say. In order to go to academia, you can postpone collecting many, many papers. And I don't want to postpone it. I want it to never happen. I think that we are drowning in too many publications, and especially in areas, in this area recently of fairness and machine learning. And I think people should hold back and think twice. Are they sure that they have something worthwhile to say?
Thank you. I think yes. I think it applies, unfortunately, to many areas of science. Marc-Antoine, do you want to say something?
A word of wisdom for a
from a
student.
philosopher.
Yeah, for a philosopher. Let me think. Remain curious and open-minded in this area. I see too many computer scientists who think that if they can solve a very complex mathematical problem, then it will be easy to settle any societal issues. And that's not the case. And I see too many philosophers, sociologists, who think that if we can agree on the high principles and the high values, then, well, the rest is just a matter of technicality, and you know, the computer scientists will do their job to settle those technicalities. So we need to learn better from each other, and this would be my advice.
Fernando?
Yeah, for me, this is, I think, something that Manuela Veloso mentioned in a panel at IACan 2005, which is become an expert in your own area first, and then collaborate broadly. I think this is a super interdisciplinary area, but I think it's premature to say I'm just gonna focus on fairness. I think you really need to focus on your core area, be it machine learning, be it philosophy, etc., and then engage with an open mind with the other disciplines.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're gonna take the first question. I think someone is there. Yeah.
Okay,
Please
thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you very much for the engaging conversation. And I think I'm one of the few people with non-technical expertise on computing science here. Hey. The question that I wanted to ask was on the role of government in this context, because we're talking about how scientific community should engage with each other and how citizens should engage in this issue. But the point of talking about fairness, transparency, and explainability is so that those are reflected in our day-to-day lives, and with the premise that, you know, AI is a technology that doesn't remain siloed within the university, but affects the lives of everyone basically out there. So in this context, putting it simply, should there be a bigger government or smaller government in addressing the issues about fairness, transparency, and explainability?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask the panelists to answer.
No, I think that I will refer to Fernando. You were saying before you talk about fairness, become an expert in your area. Now, if I want to apply it to the government, I mean, my problem, yeah, I would like
it's a lifelong project, eh?
Yeah, I would like to see a kind of regulations and guidance, but I don't trust their expertise. And therefore, I will just step back and say, let at this stage things just happen, because you don't understand them well enough to enforce any rules or directions.
Fernando?
Yeah, I guess I might be dodging the question here, but I do think there's something to be said for self-governance or pedagogy here. Insofar as let's say in industry, we're noticing a lot of the problems that we've talked about today, but the students that we're hiring, they're ill-prepared to discussions about this. They don't have the vocabulary. They are not refined in thinking about things like ethics or fairness, etc. And so, to the real academics in the room, I would encourage you to think about how to integrate this into your programs. I guess not necessarily as a one-course ethics class that someone can sleep through, but really into the whole program, so that people, when they graduate, and some of them will enter industry, have that sort of way of reasoning about the social implications.
I'll give my take on this at the end. Please, we have another question.
Yeah, thanks for a really engaging conversation. I guess, reflecting while you were talking on the opening remarks about the importance of maintaining our social license for the work we do, I think is a really valuable viewpoint. And on the other hand, something I really took from your comments on the panel throughout are that particularly fairness is really thorny. It's difficult to come up with a definition. Different definitions that all seem sensible disagree, and even formulating what fairness means is really kind of hard to come by. I wonder, putting those two things together, surely, if we're at risk of losing our social license, it's not because we slightly got wrong the definition of fairness and, misunderstood some edge case. Surely it's that we would build a system that egregiously fails in a way that, everyone would agree was a violation of fairness, that different definitions, it doesn't live at the boundaries between different definitions. I wonder if there's a way forward, at least in the short term, that works in more negative terms, that thinks more about kind of egregious unfairness and what we have to certify that our systems avoid, rather than aiming to optimize some kind of perfect definition of fairness.
That's a great question. Can we get practical?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have an answer. I think it's a very good question, and I think we cannot we generalize, but there are different roles. I mean, if a company is offering a tool for judges to decide on fairness, I want to have the tools to monitor whether it's unfair or not. And in that respect, I agree with you that crude tools are necessary, and we should rather deploy them fast than wait until we have a complete definition. But it's not exactly about the development of the area, as you were addressing, or the benefits from AI. It's about how to weed out kind of malicious players in the ground. But it's not clear to me how it applies to the development of AI from the positive point of view.
Yeah, so there's been a few papers in the last year that have interviewed actual machine learning engineers to better understand what they're looking for in fairness tools. And it's rarely the case that they're asking for a better fairness definition or even a better way to debias something, whatever that means. They're looking for cruder sort of tools to understand data sets, to gather data better, et cetera. And so I don't think this is answering the question exactly, but I do think that, yes, maybe we should be focusing more on what the engineers, et cetera, are looking for right now to avoid situations which companies are dreading, which is that blog post, that ProPublica article that's going to send their stock down a few points.
But, well, it depends on the areas you're targeting. So, for instance, if it's the judicial system, well, fairness is very, very simple. It's just similar case should be treated equally. So if you're, and it's very simple to understand in the judicial sector. So, for instance, if you are a square, I want to use other qualifications. So if you're a square, and for an offense X, you get 10 years. And for the same offense, if you're a circle, you get 20 years. That's very simple here to detect, identify an unfair treatment, and maybe, with different techniques, to identify the source of this unfair treatment. So we can use counterfactuals, we can use different techniques to identify the source, but here it's very, very easy. Now, in health, let's say you're a circle and the machines that can provide a diagnosis for a skin cancer. So the machines are trained only for the skin of circle people. And then you see that, okay, it works very well for those people, but it works not that well for other people, for instance, square people. Well, this is a problem because you need to know where is the source of the bias. And here, well, it might be obvious, but if we don't have the same amount of data for square people as for circle people, sorry, it's very weird to say that, but well, you can say we should have the same amount of data for both. But now, how did you get those data equally for the two subgroups? And there, you can, you know, it will be difficult to get the same amount of data unless you have biased approach to favor one subgroups over another. And so this is complex, but it depends on the area. And I could, go.
So I guess, you know, what you're saying is the whole fairness and ethical considerations are going to have to be contextualized per sector. Like transport is one thing, health is another maybe, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we have a patient question waiting.
Yes, it was question to Shai, and this is question about your answer to one of the previous questions. I completely agree with what you said about the advice to students, not just to students, I would say to all of us, to focus on harder, more challenging problems and avoid just generating many, many papers for the sake of numbers. And it's great advice, and I'm also mentioning it to my students. Joshua Bengio mentioned that multiple times during his interviews at AI week at MIT, for example, and so on and so forth. It's great, we all agree. How do you suggest to implement it? Resource is limited, and therefore everybody is thinking about their CVs. How do you convince your students to publish less than more? There must be some incentives or some metrics that will make it advantageous for them. Otherwise, it's like it's a great idea, it's a great desire, I totally share it, it's not practical.
Yeah, but I don't take such an economical view or utilitarian view of the life of academics. I mean, there is a reason why we are in academia and we are not in Google making 3 times as much salary. We also
I was not talking about money.
No, I'm just saying that we are not only motivated by a kind of, you say, what mechanism could direct people towards behaving in the right way. And I'm saying that your inner judgment, your self-respect, your own principles should direct you, and it should not always only come from outside incentives.
I agree, but as we all know, to be a member of society and to be free from society is impossible. You know whom I'm quoting.
So if I may just like maybe provide a sort of answer, I agree with you that the individuals are part of a system, and the entire system has to embrace the same principles.
Exactly.
Whether it's at the university for promotions or at the granting council for basically review. So you'd be happy to know, I don't know if you guys have noticed, that the Granting Council in Canada have signed to the DORA declaration, which means that it's not the numbers that count, it's not the impact factor of the journal or the conference, but it's the quality of the work. So let's keep the pressure on and make sure that, you know, the peer review system, you know, behaves in that way, because I think that, but it's, you know, a collective responsibility.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was talking about. Thank you.
So, listen, this has been a most exciting, I think, dialogue. I have not forgotten the colleague who asked the question about the role of government. I would just like to maybe invite everyone here to just think about what we can learn from the past. What can we learn from disruptive technologies, be it in reproductive technologies, be it in stem cells, etc. And governments ended up passing laws and so on, but only after there was proper societal, conversations and expert advice. So I'd just like to say that everyone here in this room actually does have a responsibility to engage in that dialogue, in that thinking around what's ethical. What is it that we would, recommend that government does or doesn't do? I don't think that, and I agree with you, Shai, I don't think that we want at this stage to ask the government, to do this. We need to rise to the occasion and make recommendations, but I do believe that we have some work to go. So, thank you very much.